So I'd like to thank the Bolton Cultural Council for funding this event, and also the Bolton Council on Aging for hosting and co-sponsoring. And I'd like to begin programs by acknowledging that we live on land that was managed and inhabited before European colonization. Please take a moment to find your location on the map and honor those whose land we now occupy. So what are beneficials in the title of attracting beneficials of this program? Well, according to gardeners and farmers, they are organisms that help them to grow the food that we need. And so they would include pollinators, predators of pests, and parasites of pests, both of them controlling pest populations naturally. Pollination is important for genetic diversity. If pollen wasn't passed from one flower of one plant to the flower of a different plant, they would all be clones of each other. There would be no variety and no resilience for the plants to be able to change with response to environmental changes. And when we think about, well, who are the pollinators out there? The first three that might come to your mind are bees, butterflies, and hummingbirds. And that is certainly the ones that are featured here. Bats don't pollinate flowers here in New England, by the way. Only in the Southwest can they do that. But this list would be leaving out moths, wasps, flies, and beetles. And it's not surprising that they're not shown on this poster because they're just not as charismatic. I think people enjoy the more colorful pollinators, but they can be just as important. 80% of all plants need pollinators of some kind to set seed. The other 20% are wind pollinated, and 1/3 of our food is pollinated. And you can see in here how much of a difference it makes. The strawberry on the right did manage to get some pollen, wind-borne strawberry pollen from a different plant, but no insect was allowed to come to it. The one in the middle didn't even get the wind-borne pollen. So you can see how important it is to get pollen from a different individual to set seed and have a decent fruit or a vegetable. So then we have the predators, as I mentioned, and birds are one of them. Birds control the pest populations. They also, in the environment, they are good at seed dispersal. The only two birds locally that are likely to pollinate flowers are the hummingbird and the oriole. Bird populations in general have declined by an alarming rate, 30% since 1970, and 2/3 of our birds could be gone by the end of the century if we continue at the pace of global warming and the lack of habitat. We're in what's called the Anthropocene, the seventh extinction event, because so much of our, this is a graph of just not the numbers total of individuals, but the number of species that are endangered in all the different categories of vertebrate animals. So let's help not harm birds. And one thing we can do to avoid harming them is helping them to see that windows are windows and not a continuation of the outside, which they can appear to be from the reflection. We can do different things to treat our windows so that birds will see them and not fly into them. And you can visit abcbirds.org for details about these and other approaches. And if you'd like, I can send you an email message with a list of the links that I'm offering at the bottom of these slides, so you don't have to be too concerned about taking notes. Cats kill up to 3.7 billion birds in the US every year, either house cats or feral cats. And if you have a cat, you might want to just keep it inside for its own protection, because these are for wild animals that might try to make a meal of it. And there are other cats and dogs out there that also might be a threat. Habitat loss includes agriculture and residential and commercial development, which has had a huge impact on all wildlife. And so has climate change. One thing that about birds is they're just so appealing, and people love to watch them and learn about them. You can find out which bird club is near you at massbird.org. And right now, you don't really need to be near a bird club to be able to enjoy their programs, since things are happening online. So we love birds. We love to watch them fly. We love to hear them sing. And they're just so endearing in the ways that they are devoted to their mates and to raising their offspring. And so birds need food, water, shelter, and places to rear their young, just like any organism does. But we should not be feeding birds with baked goods that's heavily processed and that contain preservatives, salt, sugar, and refined flour. Those are empty calories and not good for our health either, for that matter. And they don't contain enough of the protein and fat that birds need. So this is the result of feeding birds too much of that processed baked goods. So approved foods for birds include eggshells, which are they can eat them and use them for grist, to grind up the food in their gizzards. And the females also can use that calcium to make their eggs. Bananas, apples, and raisins are among the fruits that you can feed to songbirds. And then there's cheese and a variety of vegetables and grains and squash seeds. I've been enjoying giving them to the songbirds on my deck this year, and any kind of nuts, including peanuts and peanut butter as well. You can you'll see the peanut butter on that hanging cone in the middle slide there with dried fruits and seeds attached to it. So you can make a variety of different kinds of homemade bird feeders, or you can purchase one. If you have an open one like this, you're going to have to clean it frequently. Squirrels will always try to get your bird seed, so there are ways to baffle them, to ban them. And placement of feeders is important. First, a metal pole will prevent animals from being able to climb up. And if it's 8 feet long and buried 2 feet down, then it'll be 6 feet up. It should be less than 3 feet from window or more than 30 feet away, and that's to prevent collisions. And at least 12 feet away from vegetation, so that no animal that a potential predator could be lurking and then spring on them. Window feeders are a great option because they're safe. There's no danger of window collisions, and you'll be monitoring the cleanliness, or how clean is that feeder, because you'll see it every day. And of course, the advantage is you'll be able to see them really close up. You can make your own suet. You don't need the peanut butter or the flour or any of the optional things. You could just do it with the cornmeal and the shortening. So you heat together the ingredients, shortening and the peanut butter if you use it, until it's all melted and mixed together, and then mix the dry ingredients in with that and freeze in a mold such as an old can or a ice cube tray. And then once it's been in the freezer for a couple of hours, it's ready to go, and you put it out in your suet feeder. Bird baths can be inexpensive or even free if you have some things lying around that you can fashion into a bird bath. Birds appreciate heated bird baths. This give them liquid water in the middle of the winter. Your basic bird box, and you'll see at the bottom, allbirds.com is the source of this information. You'll notice how if you want to make one, you should have 3 holes for ventilation on the top of each side. You should have hinges. You'll see the hinges on the side of this box, so that you can open one side and inspect and clean it at the end of the year. Also, there should be holes at the bottom for drainage. And once again, a metal pole is a good idea to deter predators. If you place it in the shade, that's a good idea, and giving birds a clear flight path to the bird box and face the opening away from the prevailing wind. You don't want to be encouraging starlings and house sparrows, and you are free to evict them any way you choose, or to harass or trap them, because these are not protected birds by the state. They are, in fact, invasives, I guess you could call them. They are non-native birds that were introduced and have done a lot of harm to native populations by displacing and even killing and eating them. Here are some birdhouse don'ts. Please don't put up colorful birdhouses, because that attracts the attention of predators. Birds do not need perches. They can fly right to the hole. They don't need a perch to perch on. And that only gives more purchase to the predator. Birds' houses should always be made of only wood, and they shouldn't dangle in the breeze either. They should be securely fastened. Squirrels would be happy to move into a bird box just by chewing the opening and allowing them to enter. So you can prevent them from doing that. And you can also use a variety of means to protect the bird box from predators besides squirrels, including raccoons, snakes, cats, other cats, and other birds. So if you have used this wire mesh opening, that's an ideal system, especially if you choose to use a tree as the way to put a birdhouse up. At the end of the year, you should clean it with a 9-to-1 solution of water and bleach, and clean it well with a brush, and then put it back out. Caterpillars are a great baby food for chicks because they're nice and soft and they have all the nutrition that those birds need to grow. And that young, that mother caterpillar will require 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to raise her chicks to grow enough and fledge to become adults. So that's a lot of caterpillars, and caterpillars themselves need native plants to eat. Doug Tallamy is the scientist who knows his caterpillars and butterflies and moths, and he has done a lot of research to show that it's the native plants that caterpillars are able to eat because they've been around so long that the caterpillars have figured out how to eat them. All plants have evolved certain chemical defenses, and they try to they manage through a course of evolution to create chemicals that don't taste good or are not digestible. But then the caterpillars also evolve right along with them and figure out how to digest them anyway. But they haven't had time to figure that out over the course of evolution with non-native plants. So that's why native plants are so important. Here is a list of the best trees, vines, and shrubs to plant for birds. Oaks, because they have so many caterpillars on them, are probably the #1 tree. If you ask a bird, what's your favorite tree? They also love mulberries. These are delicious fruits, and I can attest to that as well. It's a messy tree. You don't want to plant it so that the fruit will drop on your sidewalk or on your driveway. But if you have a corner of your yard to place this, you'll be delighted to see all the birds come and feast on this tree. Sassafras, a beautiful tree in all seasons, is another one that has fruit attractive to birds, as does elderberry. And one of my favorites, I love elderberry pancakes. A beautiful shrub and great for pollinators as well. And we'd like to plant ornamentals on our property, but there's no need for those ornamentals to be non-native. Our native plants are just as beautiful, if not more so. Here's an example of that, the wild raisin or nanny berry. I call this an ornithomental because ornithology is the study of birds. So birds are attracted to beautiful plants as well. Native plants, here's another ornithomental, another viburnum, and maple leaf viburnum grows in the shade, and it's a smaller plant, but black haw viburnum is a taller tree, and they're all just stunning, and they all attract birds. And then there's the dogwoods. Every dogwood has fruit that birds can eat and and is welcome to birds. In fact, when the birds are migrating in August and September, they might completely strip a gray dogwood tree of its fruit. Red osier dogwood, a beautiful shrub in all seasons. White dogwood, a small tree. You can get 10 free white dogwoods at arborday.org, and a number of other trees are offered by them as well. All you have to do is make a donation of any amount, and the trees are yours. Spice bush, the fruits are half fat, which is a great source of energy for birds. Birds love blueberries. They love Juneberries, and so do I. I think Juneberries are just as tasty as blueberries are. Beautiful tree in all seasons. It's a small tree with comes in bloom in May, and then that delicious fruit. Hawthorn is another member of the rose family that has fruit that's attractive to birds, as are crab apples, and certainly black cherries and choke cherries, those wild cherries that they're kind of weedy species, but that there's an advantage to the fact that they can spread themselves around, or the birds help them to get spread around. Now this is not a choke cherry, it's a choke berry, and it's not a cherry at all, but it also has edible fruit, and again edible for humans as well as birds. Beautiful tree in all seasons. People have often used shrub rather. Is a kind of a tall shrub. People have often used this shrub for ornamental purposes, not even being aware that both people and humans can eat that fruit. Blackberry and black raspberry are eaten by birds, as are the fruits of Staghorn Sumac, which will persist even into the beginning of the winter and can be edible. And in the mid or even late winter, the fruit of the winterberry holly is available for birds to eat. They are, this is a dioecious tree, which means that there are male plants and female plants. In order for the female plants to bear fruit, they need to have a male nearby for cross-pollination. And northern bayberry, those fruits hang on through the winter as well and can be a welcome sight to a hungry bird in winter. Conifers are very useful in winter as well because they offer shelter, and birds can nest in them in the summer, and also a variety of insects and caterpillars. There are 200 different species of moth and butterfly caterpillars visit the white pine. So that's a feast for birds as well. And the eastern red cedar has edible fruit. Now, if you're ready to plant, dig an extra wide hole, no deeper than necessary. That's so that it doesn't sink, because you don't want the stem or the trunk at all submerged by the soil. That's to keep it, to protect it from disease. So keep the topsoil and subsoil in separate piles so that when you return that soil to the hole, you put the subsoil in first and then the topsoil. And resist the temptation to put in compost, because that would kind of spoil the roots. You want them, you want those roots to move out of that hole that you've dug and keep on moving, growing laterally. That's what roots do mostly. They don't grow down so much as they grow out, because that's where nutrition is, in the soil. So surround the tree with mulch, but not up to the trunk. And you might want to create a rim around the tree, which will help to contain the water from irrigation. And you do want to irrigate make sure your plant is irrigated if there isn't adequate rainfall for the first couple of years to make sure that it thrives. On with the list now. For vines, we've got Virginia creeper, edible for birds but not for humans, and both kinds of wild grape. Many birds visit. And then there's this ground cover called bearberry, and those fruits are edible not just to bears, but birds as well. Beautiful ground cover that it's an evergreen ground cover, and it requires full sun. And what bird wouldn't want to visit a sunflower and help itself to all those seeds? But it's not the only flower that has edible seeds for birds. The closely related black-eyed Susan in the same plant family called Asteraceae, the aster family, also has edible seeds, as does purple coneflower. And all of these plants on this slide have seeds that are edible for birds. All of them are in the aster family except for sedum, which is right here down below in the middle. So you can see that plants of the aster family have, as a rule, have edible seeds for birds. So leave seed stalks standing so that food will be available to them. And also the plants, the dead plants will be available, or the stalks will be available for refuge for insects. And for the same reason, leave the leaves wherever you can. You could leave them under shrubs. You could use them as mulch around trees. And if you'd like to hold those leaves in place, you could take some leaves and mow them and then put them on top of the leaves that haven't been mowed. And that would kind of keep the larger leaves from blowing away. Leave dead trees and snags if they don't pose a hazard. It's a habitat for birds and also for the insects the birds will eat. And create brush piles, because a lot of creatures, both vertebrates and non-vertebrates, or invertebrates rather, will make a home in that brush pile. And it's all part of the web of life happening in there. But there's not too much habitat here in this picture, unless perhaps that tree is a native tree. So the problem, one of the problems is that we've come to think of our property as a place where we demonstrate how, the virtue of our character or something, or perhaps in this case, back 400 years ago, the aristocracy wanted to prove how much money they have. They didn't even need to use their land to grow food. So there are problems with this attitude about the appearance as being the only consideration, because it's a food desert for wildlife. And also in order to keep it looking like a carpet. It's a polluter and a resource guzzler. So we use far more synthetic pesticides on our lawns than the farmers do on their crops. We use an unconscionable amount of water, keeping them irrigated. And so consider that if your lawn is struggling, maybe from shade or standing water or erosion, just plant native perennials. They know what to do, and they can do just fine there, and your property will look a lot better, and then you'll be creating habitat for birds and other animals. So environmental organizations are asking us to reduce the size of our lawns by at least 25%, which I think is a reasonable goal. And not only is it good for wildlife, it's good for us. It nourishes our souls, and it's just so beautiful to see things growing and to see things happening and watch nature interact and watch those pollinators and the birds that come to visit. So in order to make that landscaping attractive, consider having different layers. Consider massing your one species of flower. It can be quite stunning. Plenty of flowers is a good idea throughout the growing season, and to make sure that pollinators' needs are being met as well. Covering the foundation with plants makes your landscaping more aesthetically appealing, and as do crisp edges and bold patterns. And containers, structures, and other objects which make it look planned and not random. One of the first things you might want to do is deal with the invasive plants that are on your property. You inventory them by first learning how to recognize them and then find them, make a realistic plan for how to either eradicate or control them, and then follow through with that plan. Public enemy number one, perhaps, is Japanese knotweed. It's almost impossible to get the roots out because even one tiny piece of root remaining, and it's very difficult to get the roots to dig down and get them. Just little pieces will grow more stalks. So cutting them back and repeatedly for a matter of 3 or 4 years would finally defeat them, or covering them with smothering them with some very substantial material that they won't be able to poke through is another approach. Oriental bittersweet can choke and kill a tree. So you should cut the vines down at the ground level if any of them have reached a canopy of any trees that you have. And then at any stage, even if it's a young plant, dig it up by the roots, and that's the way to control it. Autumn olive is a shrub that's non-native, that is nitrogen fixing, so it has an edge over our native plants. So that should also be dug up, and so should Multiflora Rose, another non-native plant that has made itself pretty much of a nuisance and displaced. And here 4 other plants: burning bush, goutweed, garlic mustard, and black swallowwort. Burning bush was sold by nurseries before it became evident that and perhaps it still is sold in some places, but it shouldn't be, because it really is invasive. Migrating birds prefer native fruits simply because they are more nutritious, such as blueberries, black cherries, and black raspberries. They avoid Japanese barberry, oriental bittersweet, and multiflora rose, even if these fruits are in abundance, simply because they don't offer them enough of the nutrients that they need. Poison ivy is a native plant, and it's not problematic in terms of the environment. Birds even eat the fruit over the winter. But it's certainly understandable if you want to eliminate poison ivy on your property, wherever there are people. So sheet mulching is a way to smother any vegetation that you don't want and transition to your plan of the plants that you want to establish. So if you smother a lawn with either cardboard or newspaper, 6 thicknesses of newspaper, and then overlapping and just soak the whole layer that you're using as that smothering layer, and then add the mulch on top. And you can use it's called ramboard. The photo in the lower right is rolled up cardboard for large areas. You can order that online, and you can have garden beds. You can start this way with a raised bed or a more traditional bed. Benefits of mulch include suppressing weeds, keeping the soil moist and cool, and enriching the soil. And the types of mulch you can use for annuals, such as for a traditional vegetable garden, would include grass clippings, straw, shredded leaves, and pine straw or pine needles, which do not make the soil acidic, as many people, even gardeners, have been led to believe. And so the shredded leaves and pine straw are also good in perennial beds, as are pine bark, sawdust, wood chips, and chipped branch wood. That's that's chipped by a chipper. Mulching smart, it means avoiding dyed mulch. It's not the dye that's the problem, it's the wood that's used to make it, which is often contaminated with creosote and CCA. And don't do volcano mulching, which makes your trees vulnerable to diseases and also encourages roots to form where they shouldn't be growing up there. And then when that mulch decomposes, you have all those exposed roots. So a properly mulched tree is shown in a bottom slide, bottom photograph on this slide. And think about how mulch should be just temporary until your plants get big enough to claim the space. At that point, they won't need to be mulched because there's no chance that weeds can come in and compete. So if your planting plan, if you envision this kind of thing, this happens to be a rain garden, which receives the water from drain spouts from the building. And then any excess water comes out at the bottom where you see those pebbles that lead to the lead downhill. Ground covers are an option that imitates mulch in some ways because it does the same things by preventing weeds, retaining moisture, and keeping the soil cool. It also holds soil in place on slopes. I mentioned bearberry previously as a bird-friendly plant. It's a beautiful, one of my favorite ground covers, grows well in the sunshine. Here's another great one. Honeybees love the nectar that they get from thyme flowers because it keeps them healthy. It helps them to combat diseases and pests. Three-leaf cinquefoil is a beautiful ground cover. Golden star. In the shade, wild ginger tolerates dense shade. So does bishop's hat. Beautiful leaves. And I love the leaves of Allegheny pachysandra, which is a native pachysandra. I consider it more attractive than the Japanese pachysandra that we see so much of. Barren strawberry and even wild strawberry are other options. Now let's talk about hummingbirds, which are beneficials, no question about it, predators and pollinators both. Ruby throat is the only hummingbird that you're likely to see here in Massachusetts. And their population has doubled since 1970, so we don't really need to be concerned about them, but we are certainly free to welcome them to our properties, and they are expert predators, and they need that protein to live, and they also love water, and we can provide snags for perches so they can survey their surroundings and take a rest. Leave dead trees because the sap that comes out of those holes made by the sapsuckers and woodpeckers attracts insects that the hummingbird can snatch up. And hummingbirds use spider silk to make their nests. Surprisingly, the nest expands to double its original size as those eggs hatch and the chicks grow, because the hummingbirds have used spider silk, which is so flexible, to make the nest. If you find a chick on the ground, it's okay to rescue it and return it to its nest. You can, in fact, do that with any species of bird. It's not true that it will be rejected if the human smell is on the chick. The mother will still take care of it. Now, if you decide to feed hummingbirds, this is a good design for a hummingbird feeder because it's easy to take it apart, to disassemble it and clean it. Notice that the nectar does not need to be red. In fact, you should not use red dye or food coloring. And all you need is water and sugar, 1 cup water to 1/4 cup sugar in that 4:1 ratio. Heat it to dissolve the sugar, then refrigerate, use within 1 week. And then replace the food in the feeder every few days and clean your feeder every 3 days. In order to clean the feeder, use hot tap water, scrub the sides, don't use soap. And if black mold appears, you're going to have to soak in a bleach solution of a 1:64 ratio with water for 1 hour. The nectar can become cloudy and start to spoil in a matter of 1 day. So I think I'm impressing on you how important it is if you have hummingbird feeders to really be on top of the cleaning routine. And I would rather have flowers to attract them because I know that they are superior nutritionally as well. They have just the right balance of sugars. They also have trace amounts of minerals, proteins, amino acids that hummingbirds need for their health. This vine, the Trumpet Creeper, is very robust. You should not have it near your foundation. That might cause problems, but elsewhere on your landscape, it might be just the thing for hummingbirds. They also love trumpet honeysuckle, the red of flowers, and cardinal flower. What a stunning plant this is for hummingbirds and butterflies. Hummingbirds love to sip the nectar of the wild columbine, and it's a welcome sight for a hungry hummingbird that's just arrived in the spring, migrating from South America. Butterfly weed is another flower that hummingbirds can sip the nectar of, as is anise hyssop, one of the mints, a wonderful pollinator plant. Obedient plant, another in the mint family. Blazing star, swamp milkweed, foxglove beard tongue, another spring blooming plant. Purple coneflower, and any of the phlox species. And the lepidopterans, which are butterflies and moths, are also pollinators. Butterflies and moths are different in a variety of ways. Butterflies usually are more colorful, and moths are relatively drab in appearance, but there are exceptions to that rule. Butterflies are usually active in the daytime and moths at night. Butterflies rest with their wings in the vertical position, while moths always have their wings outstretched. And butterfly antennae are club-tipped, while moth antennae look like feathers. And butterflies make chrysalises while moths spin cocoons. Butterfly populations, this is a study that from Ohio, a 33% population reduction just in 20 years. The usual combination of habitat loss, pesticides, climate change, pollution can also be a problem for insects. Butterfly gardening, if you are ready to establish a butterfly garden, think about sun. It'd be good to have at least 6 hours of sun daily, full sun. To be near a water source is good, and some shelter from the wind. And you'll need to have host plants so that you can have, in order to have butterflies, you've got to have some caterpillars first. Nectar producing plants throughout the growing season for those adult butterflies. And please use organic landscaping practices to keep them safe and healthy. You might want to evaluate your soil before you begin. Test it for compaction, which is probably the #1 landscaping problem that people deal with. Whether there's adequate moisture and what's the texture of the soil. Is it clay or sandy? Different plants can handle clayey soil or texture or sandy soil, or for that matter, soil that's pretty waterlogged. So in some cases, it's just a question of the right plant for the right place. But in any event, you'll want to be familiar with these properties, as well as the trace elements and the organic matter and the pH, which can be tested for by UMass Amherst has the soil testing service, ag.umass.edu. Don't bother with butterfly boxes. No one has ever found a butterfly inside one of them. Yes, they've sometimes spiders move in, sometimes wasps, but never butterflies. But they do like mud. It's the males that need the mud so that they can get minerals from the mud and then create pheromones in their bodies, which are then attractive to the females, that they can smell them and find the males that way. And then when they mate, the males also give some of those minerals to the females so that she can pass the minerals on to the eggs. So give butterflies mud, and you can use a repurposed bird bath for that. Using gravel or sand, sea sand from the beach would be, beach sand would be great because it has those minerals in it. Or if it doesn't, if it's just regular sand, add some salt or compost and keep it moist. Butterflies love fruit, even if it's starting to go bad, it doesn't seem to bother them. Give them host plants so that they can become adults. So here are the best host plants here in Massachusetts for butterflies and moths. Goldenrod and sunflower, tied at 34 different species of butterflies and moths. Asters and black-eyed Susan, a close second and third. And there are a number of others that are great host plants. So you can see at National Wildlife Federation has a list of these plants. The best host plants for butterflies and moths, I mentioned oak as being the champion at 473 different species. Willow's coming in second at 399, and birch 393, and a number of other trees are just great host. Trees and shrubs are great for feeding those caterpillars. But if you're a spice bush swallowtail mother, you will only lay your eggs on sassafras trees or spice bush shrubs, because those leaves are the only ones that the caterpillar can eat. And the host plant for black swallowtail is anything in the parsley family. And for Baltimore checkerspot, turtlehead and plantain, which is a common longweed. Spring azure caterpillars can eat New Jersey tea, viburnums, meadow sweet leaves, or dogwood trees. And the great spangled fritillary caterpillar depends on violet leaves, which are common in people's lawns. What a beautiful butterfly this is. And then there's the monarch, which is probably the most well-known and best loved pollinator that we have. And monarchs, as you may know, require common milkweed for a host plant. Caterpillars cannot eat any other plant besides milkweed, but this is not the only species of milkweed out there. In fact, I don't suggest that you put common milkweed in your garden, because it's kind of a bully. It'll just keep moving here and there underground with underground runners, and it'll just take over. So if there's a wild place where you don't mind that happening, that's fine. But otherwise, if there's a garden that you'd like to have a variety of plants to coexist, swamp milkweed and butterfly weed are preferable for sunny situations, and poke milkweed in the shade. Swamp milkweed, as the name implies, can handle wet soil. Butterfly weed can handle dry soil. But both of them could handle normal soil just fine as well. So look at these pollinators that come to visit the flowers of these both, of common milkweed and butterfly weed and swamp milkweed. Just a lot of action on these flowers. It's fun to watch what shows, which pollinators show up. And the poke milkweed is the one that grows in the shade. So it's the glyphosate, which is sprayed on farmers' fields, which kills so many milkweed plants and has caused monarch populations to drop so dramatically, in addition to these other causes. So you can establish a monarch way station and proudly display a sign that demonstrates what you're doing, which you can send away to monarchwatch.org is the website there. Here's one approach. You can visit edibleterrace.com if you'd like to plug in the plants that they recommend. Notice how a little blue stem, the grass, is included. Sometimes it's good both for aesthetic purposes and for wildlife to have some grasses in with the flowers. Also notice that plants are massed, so that there's a group of plants taking up maybe 3 to 4 square feet. When the butterflies are visiting that particular flower, they don't have to fly far to find the next plant that has that same nectar. According to Sharon Stichter, these are the top 15 butterfly plants. She created this list about a decade ago for the North American Butterfly Association. And now she listed butterfly bush as number 1, but I think she might have changed her mind since then, because not only is butterfly bush not a host plant for any butterfly or moth species, even though, yes, it's certainly attractive in terms of a nectar plant, but of more concern is the fact that butterfly bush is becoming invasive even here in Massachusetts, and maybe more so as the climate changes. So it's best to stick with natives as a general rule. New Jersey tea is a shrub that is native to Massachusetts. So is sweet pepper bush. Compass plant is a tall plant in the aster family. Notice the leaves. It's also called cup plant. And when it rains, those leaves can collect the water, which in a little basin that makes it available to bees and butterflies and birds. A blazing star, beautiful native plant that butterflies nectar on. Thistle, any of the asters. Purple coneflower again. Scabiosa, Joe Pyeweed, which can handle moist soil and does fine in normal soil. The same is true of boneset. Any of the milkweeds are on that list of the top 15. And then there are the annuals. Zinnia is not a native plant, but that's okay to have a few annuals that are not non-native if they're doing such a great job feeding the pollinators. Another one in that category is Mexican sunflower and marigolds. You can have a container garden if there's not too much available space on your property. Pots that are fairly large are a good idea because the soil won't dry out so easy, and you'll have to use a special soil mix for containers. You can transform the strip of land between your sidewalk and the road to a pollinator garden, sometimes called a health strip, but it won't be called that anymore if you have these beautiful flowers growing. And Gardens with Wings is a great website to visit. You'll see all the different plants that you can grow to attract specific specific butterfly species. So that information is provided at that website. Now think about how even your lawn could be a wildflower resource if you don't mow so often. In fact, a researcher proved and did a study in Springfield, Massachusetts, that lawns that were mowed every other week instead of every week, there were so many more flowers that were allowed to grow and so many more pollinators, including some fairly rare non-native bees that were showing up at these lawns. So you can call it a bee and butterfly lawn, you can call it a lazy lawnmower lawn, or you can call it a freedom lawn. Whatever you call it, it's a great way to welcome pollinators. And also to not mow closer than 3 or 4 inches. And certainly to avoid using herbicides so you can allow these plants to grow. And a wildflower meadow is a possibility. You don't need this much land. You could have as little as 400 square feet would be adequate. Anything less than that, it just doesn't look very good. You're better off having a garden. But wildflower meadows can be created if with some investment of both time and money. You have to eradicate the vegetation, which is a process that takes a full year. And there are a number of ways to do that. Smothering is one if it's not too large an area. And the other methods are described at extension.unh.edu. And at the end of that first year, once the vegetation has been killed and there are no seeds coming up from the seed bank in the soil, then you're ready to sow your seed in the fall. And at that point, your maintenance costs will go way down because you only have to mow once a year, if that, just to make sure that there are no saplings and invasive plants coming into your meadow. So over the long run, you'll be saving a lot of money. And you'll have a beautiful wildflower meadow attracting pollinators and wildlife. And bees would also be among the pollinators, as in addition to the butterflies. And the one bee that most people think of is, and because it's so common, and it's the one that pollinates so many of our crops and gives us honey, is the honeybee. But it is a non-native bee. And it's in some ways, it's not as effective as our native bees at pollination because it's a short-tongued bee, so it can't reach the long tubes of that some flowers have. And honeybees don't tend to go out in chilly mornings, while some native bees are perfectly capable of pollinating under those conditions. And there are so many, honeybees certainly are important because they make honey and they pollinate a lot of our crops. So farmers depend on them. But there are a lot of other native bees out there that are helping to pollinate our crops and pollinating the native plants as well. And if the non-native honeybee was to become extinct, it would have no ecological consequence. In fact, it might even benefit the native bees because that would eliminate the competition that honeybees can sometimes pose when they're foraging on their plants. Bees and wasps are different. Bees are fuzzy, and if someone tells me they've been stung by a bee, I'll ask them, well, do you think it might have been a yellow jacket? Because yellow jackets are actually wasps, and you're more likely to get stung by them since their nests are in the ground, and it's easy to walk on them without knowing. Bumblebees also are excellent pollinators. They come in a lot of different varieties in terms of the long-tongued, medium-tongued, short-tongued. They are just like honeybees, they're social, but they do not create honey that is harvestable by humans. And their hives are a lot smaller, just hundreds instead of thousands of bees in one hive, as is the case with honeybees. And gardeners really appreciate the way that they can use buzz pollination to pollinate tomato flowers and other flowers in the nightshade family. The pollen is inside these fused anthers, and what the bumblebee does is grabs on and vibrates those anthers at just the right frequency so that the pollen is released from inside the anthers onto its body, which is why they're so valuable to farmers who grow tomatoes, and people will provide them with a place for their colony, that bumblebee box there. Other crops pollinated by bumblebees include raspberries, cranberries, blueberries, strawberries, and cucumbers. There are some flowers that only bumblebees are strong enough to get in to reap the considerable rewards inside of all that abundant nectar. Turtlehead is one of them, and bottle gentian is another. It never opens, the flower never opens more than that, but the bumblebee is able to force its way in nonetheless. Some bumblebees are endangered or threatened. The rusty-patched bumblebee used to be common here in Massachusetts. It's completely gone from our area now. American bumblebee is threatened as well. So the two species that actually have increased in number are the common eastern bumblebee and the two-spotted bumblebee, and those are the two most common bumblebees in New England, these two here. And there's another species that's increased slightly, but every other kind of bumblebee has declined dramatically or is just gone from New England due to pests, pathogens, pesticides, and poor nutrition from lack of habitat. So we can leave abandoned mouse and bird nests. They like to, the females like to create colonies in such a protected area, and leave it be landscaping also gives them habitat, as it does for so many other forms of wildlife. You can either make or buy a bumblebee nesting box to see if something moves in. Bumblebee mimics include these two species of fly, which manage to look enough like bumblebees so that predators are deterred from attempting to eat them. Sweat bees are a beautiful and small and harmless bee, a native bee, that is tunnel dwelling. 70% of our native bees are tunnel dwelling. And they're called sweat bees because they are attracted to human perspiration. But as I mentioned, they're totally harmless. Here's another ground-dwelling bee. The cellophane bee or polyester bee is actually able to make a plastic bag, the queen or the female, inside the cavity there. And then once it's lined the cavity with this substance that becomes firm enough to protect it, the liquid food at the bottom is a combination of pollen and nectar that is provisioned for the egg. And then when the egg hatches and consumes that liquid food and is ready to emerge as an adult, it just eats its way out of its plastic bag. It's been protected all that time in that manner, and then it's ready to live its life. So you can offer habitat for ground nesting bees. Several yards across would be a good size. Loose, well-drained soil works well. Flat areas or earthen banks, sunny and south-facing, are advisable for a location, and even a soil-filled planter can work. And stay off the area that you've chosen so that you don't disturb them. Now, the blue orchard mason bee is an example of a native bee that is not a ground-dwelling bee. Instead, they nest in cavities, and they are fantastic at pollinating the flowers of fruit trees because they go their behavior is such that they, instead of just staying on one tree and going from flower to flower to flower of that tree, which is not going to do the tree any good in terms of cross-pollination, they're more likely to visit a flower on one tree and then go to a different tree entirely and deposit the flower there. And so they're really, hundreds of times more efficient at pollinating fruit trees than honeybees are. Mason bees need mud to partition their egg chambers. And while leafcutter bees partition their chambers with these perfect circles of leaves that they bite off and then roll up and then insert into the cavity that they're using. So leafcutter bees pollinate blueberry, onion, carrot, and alfalfa among the crops that they are useful for. So let's be tolerant of those neat little circles that they cut out of leaves. I saw this for the first time, even though I was familiar with it from seeing these pictures. I saw it in my own garden last year, and I was so pleased and proud to know that leafcutter bees were being supported in my environment, and I had no hard feelings at all that they'd cut those circles out of the leaves. The picture at the lower right is a rose shrub, but we should remind ourselves that the plant itself will not be harmed. There's plenty of leaf area remaining to keep that plant healthy. So in this illustration, you'll see the top row, this piece of wood was drilled with holes to invite cavity nesting bees. And in the top row, you'll see at least a half dozen chambers that leafcutter bees have created. The rosin bee has used rosin to create her chambers, and then at the bottom, the mason bee cocoons are visible with mud partitions in between, creating the chambers. So you can use any of these different species of plant that have hollow stems and offer a bee hotel to cavity-dwelling bees. And if you have a variety of thicknesses or a variety of aperture sizes, and for those stalks, that will invite a variety of different kinds of native bees. And you can roll up pieces of paper, as you can see in the lower photograph there, and insert them into the stalks, so that at the end of the year you can extract them with the cocoons and take the ones that are diseased and throw them out. This photo in the upper right-hand corner is diseased mason bee cocoons, and then keep the healthy ones over the winter in your refrigerator. And then you can, where they'll be safe, and then you can release them in the spring in a cardboard box with a hole in it, and let them continue to create the next generation. Some of the best plants that you can establish on your landscape for these native pollinators are the following native plants. Wild bergamot is in first place. It attracts 15 different native bee genera. So we're not talking about native bee species. We're talking about genera, which is the plural of genus. So wild bergamot feeds a lot of different kinds of native bees, and as well as butterflies. In second place, black-eyed Susan. In third place, boneset. And 6 plants that are tied for fourth: the milkweeds that we already saw, tickseed, oxeye sunflower, mountain mint, and blue vervain. A word about mountain mint, one of my favorite plants, and wasps, which are important pollinators. That great black wasp is totally harmless, by the way. Taconid fly is a good beneficial organism. So mountain mint is blooming for months and attracting an amazing diversity and quantity of insects all that time. And on top of it all, you can take some of those leaves and rub them on your skin, and it will deter mosquitoes. It's an effective mosquito repellent, lasts maybe up to a half hour or so. On with the list, tied at 5th place, attracting 11 native bee genera: foxglove beard tongue, cup plant, New England aster, and golden alexanders. Golden alexanders and foxglove beard tongue are both spring blooming. It's important to have some spring blooming plants in your garden to provide nectar in the beginning of the year when those pollinators are hungry. Wild geranium is another spring blooming plant. And big leaf asters are fall blooming, which is another important time to provide for pollinators. And then yellow coneflower, and rounding out the list, anise hyssop, purple coneflower, Jacob's ladder, Ohio spiderwort, ironweed, Culver's root, which is shade tolerant, and then harebell, wild lupin, and bloodroot, all great plants for a garden to attract native bees and other pollinators. Now, I mentioned that predators and parasites are among the beneficials, so let's take a look at them. Spiders will prey on anything that they can catch, and the same is true of praying mantises. So these are both generalists, but the specialists are really the best, the most beneficial insects, because they prey on the pest insects that do damage to crops. So lacewings are among the most valuable, and so we can attract the females which are females do visit flowers and pollinate them. A lacewing motel can be made with a rolled up piece of cardboard inside of a plastic bottle whose bottom has been cut off. Ladybugs, the larvae of ladybugs are voracious predators of aphids, mites, and mealybugs. Fireflies are beneficials because they prey on insect larvae, snails, and slugs. We can offer them low-hanging trees, forest litter, long grasses, ponds and streams. Don't use fertilizers or pesticides, and please turn off your outdoor lights because it distracts and confuses the fireflies. Assassin bugs are another valuable beneficial, preying on caterpillars, beetles, mosquitoes, and flies. And the hoverfly or surfeit fly is another great one for limiting aphid populations, and they visit a wide variety of flowers as well. Trichogramma wasps are parasites. This tiny wasp is able to lay its eggs in the much larger eggs of different species of insects and keep their population in check as their eggs then consume the nutrition offered by the egg of that other species. And this is an incredible list of prey animals of the braconid wasps. If you find a caterpillar with those white things sticking out of it, that's the tomato hornworm in the upper right. Leave it be in your garden. Let it continue to keep on doing its thing, because that caterpillar will eventually die, and those adults will emerge and give us the next generation of wasps. So here are some flowers that attract the predators and parasites we've just been looking at. Queen Anne's lace, dill, and fennel are the Apiaceae family and the parsley family. And so these flowers are valuable to the predators and parasites. We've also been looking at a lot of members of the Asteraceae in terms of being beneficial for both birds and pollinators. And these parasites and predators also pollinate the goldenrod, tansy, marigold, dandelion, boneset, yarrow, coreopsis, and aster, all in the same plant family, and more besides. And then we have the mint family members: horse mint, bugleweed, wild bergamot, and anise hyssop. Bugleweed is one of those lawn flowers that can grow in your lawn. And these are all mint family plants. All have square stems and opposite leaves. So natural control of garden pests is called integrated pest management. We could also refer to it as intelligent pest management. It includes barriers or floating row covers, companion plants that'll repel those pest organisms. Hand picking can be feasible, and use organic pesticides if you have decided that would be a safe means of controlling the population. Trees and shrubs for pollinators are perhaps not the first thing you would think of if you wanted to attract butterflies and bees, because usually it's the herbaceous plants, the herbaceous perennials that we have watched bees and butterflies pollinating. However, trees have an abundant crop of flowers every spring or other times of year, and willow is perhaps the most important pollinator plant of them all. Early spring, these flowers are provisioning all kinds of different pollinators with nectar and pollen. and for a number of weeks, they keep on making that that forage available to the insects. These two witch hazel, these are witch hazel species which bloom either in the spring or the fall, depending on which, and incredibly early, the Chinese witch hazel or the vernal witch hazel comes out as sometimes as early as January. The redbud is a spring blooming tree. It's gorgeous in your landscape. And any of the fruit trees will give flowers that pollinators will eagerly seek out. And the native American plum, the native beach plum, pollinators are swarming over these flowers. Black cherry and choke cherry. So it's got flowers for the insects and fruit for the birds. These native roses, Virginia rose and Carolina rose. And please realize that the cultivated roses that we have, which are bred for appearance sake, all you see is a lot of petals, and that's all the insect sees as well. There simply is no nectar available in those flowers, no pollen either. So it's just an ornamental, but it has no wildlife value when you plant ornamental roses. Juneberry flowers. The flowers of maples and oaks, even though there are no showy petals on those trees, there is still pollen and nectar to be had. Basswood, very attractive to bees. It's also called linden tree. The bumblebees are the best pollinators for blueberry because the long-tongued bumblebees can reach that nectar. Red osier dogwood, beautiful ornamental for both birds and pollinators. Common ninebark, very attractive to pollinators, a shrub and beautiful in all seasons. And then there's the winterberry holly that we looked at on the list of bird trees for birds. It's also a good pollinator plant. Staghorn sumac, likewise. Look at all those honeybees swarming over the inflorescence of the staghorn sumac. Viburnums, the native viburnums are good for pollinators, and so are the native hydrangeas. And mountain laurel can tolerate shade well. It's a beautiful flower that brings in the butterflies. So spring ephemerals can be quite useful when in the early spring there's nothing available for often for the bees in a landscape where the typical flowers haven't opened yet. So snowdrops are quite early blooming. Crocuses are helpful. Grape hyacinths. So these are not native plants, but they're still useful for feeding the pollinators. While bleeding heart is a native plant and is a spring blooming and also blooming again in the fall. So this is a valuable plant. Bloodroot is another spring ephemeral and also a native plant. And you saw this one listed in the top plants for native pollinators. Consider culinary herbs as being a resource of nectar and pollen. Basil, chives, rosemary, oregano. So if these plants are allowed to flower, lavender, catmint, it's a non-native plant, but it's still a great one for pollinators. And Kathy Neal has offered this flowering calendar for native pollinator plants. I highly recommend this as a list that you might start with. It shows when the flowers are blooming, and it also shows what color they are. Extension.unh.edu. And again, I can send this list to you if you give me your email address, if you send me an email message after this program. Some seeds, if you want to plant plants from seed, and it's the most economical way to get a lot of plants for sure. They need to be cold and moist for an extended period, and the temperature that's required is between 34 and 41 degrees Fahrenheit. So this can be done simply by putting them in the refrigerator, which is the ideal temperature, in plastic bags with a moist medium such as vermiculite, sand, or a paper towel. And then in the spring, they're ready to germinate. Otherwise, they would refuse to germinate because they haven't experienced a winter yet. And it can be fine to have them crowded at first. You can have a lot of plants, and then when it's time to separate them, you can put them in little partitions like this in this plastic tray. These are called plugs. You can buy plugs from nurseries, and they are much less expensive than buying full-sized plants. So again, this is a way to get quantity, economy, and genetic diversity, because each one of those plants came from a different seed and is a unique individual. But there is a time and a place for cloning. Vegetative propagation can include division. This was one clump of the swamp milkweed that I took and decided that I wanted to spread it out and create more colonies. So I used clippers to separate the roots, which are attached to each stalk. You can also do layering by bending the stem and submerging it in soil and keeping it moist. That can induce the stem to form roots, and then you can sever it from the parent plant and plant it out. Cuttings are another way to get more plants. If you cut a part of the stem and then cut the leaves on the leaves at the bottom of that stem, so that when you're planting it, you're not burying fresh leaves that would invite disease. But so if you sever those lower leaves as well and then put it in a pot, keep it moist, then many species, including many of the aster family plants, will sprout roots and give you new plants. I recommend the following native plant nurseries from Massachusetts and the following New England native plant seed companies. And this is also a list I can provide to you. Think of these places as not just a source of seeds and plants, but also a source of valuable information. And so if you're if you're wondering what plants would work for a wet spot or a dry spot, or clay soil or sandy soil, or a shade area, or what have you, the people at these places can share their experience and knowledge with you. Another place to look for valuable expertise and information: if there's a plant that you'd like to identify, you can send that photo to the Tower Hill hotline at towerhillbg.org, or you can give them a call. You might also have a question about a plant that's looking sickly and wondering what's the problem and how to deal with it. They would help you out with that as well. And you might want to think about joining a garden club, learning a lot more about plants, and sharing your passion and getting recharged by other people's passion. And you can also share plants with them and benefit from their abundance as well. And think about how collaborating and celebrating nature together is so. From a practical standpoint, you can get a lot done, and it's just so much pleasure and camaraderie to be had working with people alongside other people to enjoy nature, and especially encourage children to be involved and help to foster a sense of confidence and pride in being able to grow plants, giving them a chance to grow their own food. They'll know what really fresh picked produce tastes like, and they'll grow up and have healthy eating habits. So all decisions must maximize the welfare of the unborn unto the seventh generation. This is the great binding law of the Iroquois Confederation. So we can take this to mean the success of generations, our grandchildren's 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 children. We could also be thinking about the generations to come of the birds and other wildlife. Because we have responsibility for them to ensure that they can continue to exist on the planet. There is no limit to what we can do together. Start where you are, and thank you for doing your part. Here's my email address, info@johnroot.net. I'd be happy to send you a list of the resources that I mentioned, and I'd also be happy to hear any questions or comments that you might have at this time.
John, I thought that was really interesting. There's so much information. It's hard to digest it all, but it was really, really a good presentation. Thank you.
Good. Does anyone have any questions?
Looks like you're off the hook.
Am I on here?
Yes, Sally.
I will be making a recording of this presentation available to the local TV station, and they'll broadcast it, and I think they'll also make it available as YouTube, so you can watch it whenever you care to.
Oh, great.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, John. That was very, very informative. Really wonderful. Thank you.
Well, I hope you all are inspired and are going to do wonderful things out there this year.
Well, you gave us a lot of good ideas.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. How soon is the recording going to be available?
I'm not sure. Oh, great.
Oh, great. Nikki, I'll talk with you specifically about promoting it whenever you're going to air it. We can discuss from there. Yes, thank you, guys.
Well, have a wonderful day and a wonderful life.
You as well. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
You bet.
Thank you.